On the night of March 21st, 1981, a cross was burned on the Lawn Mobile Country Courthouse, which was a part of the KKK's protest over a local murder trial. As the burning cross began to burn out, the anger and rage of the Ku Klux Klan did not. Following the event of the burning cross, this terrorist group began looking for an innocent life to take. Before the night was over, 19-year-old Michael Donald was found murdered and his body hanging from a tree. Although lynching was known to be used against African Americans accused or found guilty of crime, Michael Donald was not accused or found guilty of anything. This was an act of violence from the KKK because the second trial of Joseph Alderson, a black man accused of murdering a white policeman, had been declared as a mistrial when the jury was not able to reach a verdict. This was all explained by sociologists Stuart Tomley and Ian Beck in their book, A Festival of Violence. For the Klansmen, Tomley and Beck write, this meant that a black man could kill a white man with impunity so long as there were blacks on the jury. Donald was killed as a reprisal against the black community and to confirm the power of the Ku Klux Klan in South Alabama. The Ku Klux Klan broke new barriers in its tragic terror campaign in the American South during the 1920s when they massacred an entire town, Rosewood, Florida, by taking the practice of lynching to a whole new level. The Ku Klux Klan, also known as the KKK, was founded in 1865 and extended into almost every southern state by 1870. A group that consisted of many Confederate veterans, it was founded as a social club in Pulaski, Tennessee in 1865. The meaning of the organization's first two words come from the Greek word kakos, meaning circle. In 1867, local branches of the organization met and established what they called the Invisible Empire of the South. Nathan Bedford Forrest, who was a leading Confederate general, was chosen as the first official leader or Grand Wizard of the KKK. They were a group of white Southerners who put up a strong resistance to the Republican Party's Reconstruction policies. The Republicans during this time were trying to establish political and economic equality for African Americans during Reconstruction. In reaction to this, the KKK held an underground campaign of violence against white and black Republican leaders. The Ku Klux Klan's main goal was to reestablish white supremacy. From 1867 and forward, the participation of African Americans in public life in the South became one of the most prominent characteristics of Reconstruction, as blacks won elections in Southern state governments and even made it into the U.S. Congress. The Ku Klux Klan was created to use violence against Republican leaders and restore white supremacy in the South. During this time, the KKK was joined by the Knights of the White Camellia, founded in Louisiana in 1867, and the White Brotherhood. During 1867 up until 1868, 10% of black legislators elected became victims of violence during Reconstruction, and 7 were killed. While Republicans declared as carpetbaggers people from the northern states of the U.S. who went to the South after the Civil War to profit from the Reconstruction, and scallywags, white Southerners who collaborated with Northern Republicans during Reconstruction, both of these groups became targets of Klan violence as well. By 1870, the Ku Klux Klan had branched into nearly every southern state. Members of the KKK often wore long white robes, masks, hood, and usually carried out their attacks at night and acting on their own, but in support of the common goals of defeating radical Reconstruction and white supremacy in the South. Among the most active areas of Klan activity was South Carolina, where in January of 1871, 500 masked men attacked the Union Country Jail and lynched 8 black prisoners. After the Civil War, white Southern governments created the Black Codes, which were formed under Johnson's Reconstruction Plan before Congress wiped them all out. The Black Codes, created in 1865, were very stringent and were designed to return the South as closely as possible to its old ways of social order. Under these codes, African Americans could not sit on juries, vote, testify in trial against a white man, bear arms, own land, meet in unsupervised groups, hold public office, travel without a permit, or be out after curfew. The Ku Klux Klan violence towards the poorer white people in the South was also very dreadful. The Klan felt as if their goal would be reached through an increase of Democratic wins in the state legislatures in the South during the 1870s. As time passed, the Democratic wins across the state continued to increase. This was the result of the voter intimidation efforts by the KKK and other tactics such as Jim Crow South. Jim Crow laws included things such as racial segregation, which made it to where blacks could not eat at white restaurants, use white public bathrooms, go into white theaters, and could not drink out of white drinking fountains. The black drinking fountains were often attached to the piping of the white fountains to drink their backwash. Poll taxes were created as a legal way to prevent African Americans and poor people from being able to vote. Poll taxes stated that anyone who wanted to vote may pay a fee in order to do so. Knowing that many African Americans and poor people would not be able to pay said fee due to lack of job opportunities, the Grandfather Clause was a legal or constitutional mechanism passed by 7 Southern states during Reconstruction to deny suffrage to black Americans. As a result, even if they met all the requirements, they were not allowed to vote unless they were grandfathered in. The Compromise of 1877 was an informal, unwritten deal that settled the intensely disputed during the 1876 U.S. presidential election. It resulted in the United States federal government pulling the last troops out of the South and formally ending the Reconstruction era. With Reconstruction over and the Union Army no longer around to enforce state and federal laws, the Klan took their place in their own way. By 1880, there were no longer any African Americans in office, and a new group of racist lawmakers known as Redeemers took power. They soon created new laws that they called the Jim Crow laws. The name came from a popular show that would be performed by the whites who would put on dark makeup and give demeaning blackface performances. This, such as poll taxes, literacy tests, grandfather clauses, property requirements, and the white primary were used to keep African Americans from voting, and segregation became the new standard in the South. During the Klan's increased activity at this time, local law enforcement agencies were either one of two things. They wanted to belong to the Klan or nothing more than to defeat and destroy them. Those who were arrested Klansmen came across many difficulties trying to find people who were willing to testify against them. After 1870, Republican state governments in control of the South had no other choice but to turn to Congress for help against this terrorist group which called itself the Ku Klux Klan. This resulted in the passage of 3 enforcement acts. The most well-known enforcement act was the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871, which was also known as the Civil Rights Act of 1871 or Force Act of 1871. President Grant then sent federal forces into the South at this time to suppress Klan violence. One of the most horrific acts of the Ku Klux Klan was the Rosewood Massacre. In Rosewood, Florida, employment was provided by pencil factories. As the cedar tree population began to decline, along with the factories' needs of less employment, the white families moved away around the 1890s and then settled in the town of Sumner, which was not far from Rosewood. By the 1920s, Rosewood's population, which was about 200, was entirely made up of black citizens, except for one white family that ran the general store in town. The Rosewood Massacre was a racially motivated massacre of black people and destruction of a black town that took place within the first week of January of 1932 in Levy County, Florida. It all started on January 1st, 1923, when a 22-year-old woman named Fannie Taylor was heard screaming inside of her home. After a neighbor overheard her screaming, she was found covered in bruises, claiming that a black man had attacked her. Fannie Taylor's husband, James Taylor, a foreman at the local mill, escalated the situation by gathering an angry mob of white citizens to hunt down the man who had done this. He also called for help from the whites in neighboring counties, among them a group of about 500 Ku Klux Klan members who were in Gainesville for a rally. The white mobs prowled through around the area woods searching for any black men they could find. Law enforcement found out that a black prisoner named Jesse Hunter had escaped a chain gang and immediately designated him as a suspect. The mobs focused their searches on Hunter, convinced that he was being hidden by the black residents. Sarah Carrier, one of the residents of Rosewood, housed as many as 25 people, mostly children, in her home at times. On January 4th, armed whites surrounded her home in the belief that Jesse Hunter, a black man accused with violent assault, was hidden there. Sylvester, Sarah's son, fired a shotgun at the members of the white posse who broke down her front door and killed 2 of them. News of what occurred at Carrier's house shook the community. Newspapers inflated the number dead and falsely reported bands of armed black citizens going on a rampage. Even more white men poured into the area believing that a race war had broken out. A few of the first targets of this were the churches in the town of Rosewood, which were burned to the ground. After the falling of the churches, houses began to be attacked by first setting them on fire and then shooting people as they tried to escape from burning homes and buildings. Many Rosewood citizens fled to the nearby swamps for safety, which was where many children's lives were saved. Those who attempted to leave the swamp ended up being turned back by the men working for the sheriff. Florida Governor Kerry Hardy offered to send the National Guard to help control this terrific situation, but Sheriff Walker declined. Mobs began to disappear after many days, but on January 7th, many returned to finish off the town. In the attempt to do this, KKK members burned what little was left. By the end of all the violence, the town was completely destroyed and the residents were driven out for good. The story of Rosewood faded away quickly. Most newspapers stopped reporting it as soon as the violence had ceased, and many survivors kept quiet about their experience. The Ku Klux Klan was a disastrous terrorist organization that put fear into the lives of not just African Americans but whites as well. They took many lives of innocent people in the attempt to bring back white supremacy in southern states. They broke new barriers in its tragic terror campaign in the American South in 1920s when they massacred an entire town, Rosewood, Florida, by taking the practice of lynching to a whole new level.